Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, looters, shills, desolate, serfs, peasants, vassals, enemies of the state, meat sacks, pink slime. I'm a useful idiot. Today I want to talk about the IRS scandal. Yeah, that's what I mean. IRS scandal, you go, what's that all about? Well, you know, the IRS scandal, the scandal that never was. So what are we left with? As usual, endless hearings that nobody's even paying attention to now, and a clear-eyed view of the labyrinth of bullshit that our bureaucracy is. So, of course, all the latest stuff has come out that just kind of reiterates that this whole thing was a part as a witch hunt from the beginning, and there wasn't much of a story there. So another statement has come out that there was no connection to the White House, and this is coming from a IRS insider who is a conservative. And then we find out that all kinds of progressive groups were also scrutinized. And so anyway, it's the scandal that wasn't a scandal. And of course, everyone also has the gut feeling that they could go back to the Bush years and find the same practice, and go back to the Clinton years and find the same practice, and so on, which of course doesn't make it right, because two wrongs don't make it right. But when you're president, three wrongs or more does make it right. And that's the country we live in now. And so anyway, but I thought this wasn't a scandal all along, just because when you looked at the details, the numbers just made it seem extremely insignificant. Because remember, we're talking about theoretically maybe 75 conservative groups were looked at a little closer. And that was amongst 300 groups in general, 200 so-called other groups. So they're talking about 75 conservative groups. But we have to remember that the applications for tax-exempt status for these type of political groups, or supposedly not political groups, in 2009, the applications for tax-exempt status was 1,751. By 2012, there were 3,357 applications for tax-exempt status. And as you would guess, between 2010 and 2012, the lead up to the election, and Obama running again, there was an explosion in, guess what, Tea Party groups. And so it was no accident that perhaps some Tea Party groups were targeted for a little closer scrutiny, because ostensibly these organizations, in order to be tax exempt, are not going to have political activities. They're supposed to be for social awareness. So the fact is that Tea Party groups certainly have a aggressive political agenda. And but once again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's right. But look at the fact that 75 conservative groups out of 300 total were scrutinized out of applications for tax-exempt status of 3,357 in 2012 alone. That's not including all the other years and all the other groups that had already been approved. And a lot of this was because of the floodgate opened by Citizens United decision, where everybody can get in on giving money away. And the fact that, of course, the big super PACs weren't looked at all is something that should be more of a scandal than this nitpicking about a handful of groups that were targeted. And none of these groups even failed, per se, so that's not even an issue. But look at Crossroads GPS, started by Karl Rove, raised $800 million and spent that much in the campaign for obviously political ends. And they were operating as a nonprofit without disclosing their donors, even though the IRS had yet to rule on their applications. And that goes for Priorities USA, too, the group that contributed to Obama. And in total, in 2012, the number of applications that were turned in for all tax-exempt status, all political action group status, all kinds of political campaign donating in general, was 55,000. So bear that in mind, too. 55,000 applications, all groups, 3,357 specifically for tax exempt for political groups, and only 75 targeted for being theoretically conservative, and another 200 so-called other groups, which, as it turns out, turned out to be progressive groups as well. And there's also a lot of groups on progressive and in the conservative community that have names that heavily imply political action, which is what I was talking about earlier. So that's another pitfall. And then they actually have two categories the IRS uses to analyze these groups that apply. One is touch-and-go historical, which is what most groups get their status granted. And then there's one called emerging issues. And I would think it'd be pretty safe to say that emerging issues would be groups that align themselves with the Tea Party. And in fact, in the literature it says, quote, activities lean to a new political party, activities are partisan and appear to be as anti-Republican. So they're using the same criteria for both progressive and conservative groups. Groups that are interested in new political parties, groups that are obviously very partisan, and groups that appear to be either anti-Republican or anti-Democrat. So what we'll have is the administration blaming the systems. We'll have the administration firing fall guys. We've seen plenty of fall guys, so they throw a few people under the bus, have these endless hearings, and people are forgetting. They're already forgetting. And essentially, it was never a fire anyway. It was a hot ember, and then the partisan drones and bootlickers come out and blow on the ember and try and turn it into a fire. Well, in this case, it turned back into an ember. I'll be surprised if anything more comes of this. And as it turns out, when you get into the details, it becomes even more superfluous. Applying for tax exemption is strictly voluntary. Any of these groups could operate themselves without this certification or approval by the IRS. It's a strictly voluntary system. And any group can claim that it's tax exempt as long as it files tax disclosures. So any of those groups also could have operated and just claimed tax exempt status later and filed their taxes and disclosed what their taxes were. So that's all blown out of proportion. And asking for a list of donors is a relevant thing to do. As one law professor said, it's completely irrelevant because if your donors consist of other political organizations, then we got a problem. So that's certainly not an unreasonable request either. But, you know, a lot of this has to do with the fact that GOP wants to maintain the tax exempt status and completely backs the Citizen United's decision. And so they are completely into the funding process because they know Republicans are way better at fundraising and raise a lot of money, and they don't want to have any restrictions on that. There's a lot of powerful, rich people that back the Republican Party. And this doesn't take away that there's things that are fishy about this IRS story. I thought one of the most interesting things to me is the fact that the former IRS commissioner now, Doug Shulman, visited the White House 157 times during the Obama administration. And Shulman's predecessor only visited Bush 4 times in 4 years. So that hardly compares to the fact that for some reason the IRS commissioner was visiting the White House 157 times. But of course there's a lot of tax issues on the tables these days, and so that could possibly be being explained. But so anyway, these are the numbers, and this is the IRS scandal that never was. And interestingly enough, this whole story was broken by Associated Press, which is, of course, is another scandal where Associated Press records were confiscated for a 2-week period. But anyway, incidentally, they're the press that broke this story about the IRS scandal. And I haven't really heard much about the Associated Press scandal either. I guess when the new scandals come out, people forget about the old scandals. So I haven't really heard anything about Benghazi either. Why is that? All those 3 scandals that never were have just kind of gone away. So I guess that's the last word. At least that's my last word on the IRS scandal, unless something substantial actually comes out, which I doubt. And this is my last word on the Associated Press scandal, unless something substantial comes out, and I doubt it will. And this is my last discussion of the Benghazi incident, because nothing substantial is going to come of it. I can promise you that. So, but that's all right, because we got all these new scandals to look at. So, nothing to see here, folks. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too. And remember, if I agreed with you, then we'd both be wrong.